So we would like to welcome our celebrity guest, Mr. Sonam Wangchuk. And over to you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome Mr. Sonam Wangchuk. And over to you, sir, for your special address. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome our celebrity guest, Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, once again. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Do let me know if that's the case.
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So I bring you warm greetings from a cold and frozen Ladakh. I'm very, very happy to be with you all, yet I'm sorry I couldn't be there physically with you. But virtually is great also because we are able to connect with many people, and it doesn't, take a flight that has been causing a lot of challenges in the high Himalayas due to climate change. So I hope you can appreciate the connection, yet overlook that we are not there physically. I'm happy that you're discussing important issues about disaster management. Well, it's only apt to have someone like me from Ladakh, which I would say is the capital of disasters. We have all kinds of challenges and disasters. Challenges starting from, shortage of water to shortage of even oxygen. And we don't only have droughts, but also floods. So it's a very interesting or combination of challenges starting from, droughts and floods to earthquakes, and something regular that happens every year is our polar winters. So polar winters with -20 to -30 is a regular recurring phenomenon. But of course there are ways also, and the room I'm speaking to you from is at a comfortable +22 despite the -20 challenge outside, thanks to solar heated shelters that we have been working on. But I will today share with you not so much about our shelters, but a bit about Ladakh and some learnings from disasters that Ladakh sees. Because in the Prime Minister's 10-point agenda on disaster risk management, the 9th you would have seen is about learning from all disasters, not wasting that opportunity. So as I said, Ladakh is a capital of disasters. We should at least take our lessons from here. But before that, I'll just share with you what Ladakh is, where it is, and what kind of challenges we see and how we can mitigate them, and we here in the mountains can adapt to these challenges. So let me share with you some screen. If you can allow me to share my screen, I will take you on a pictorial journey of Ladakh and share with you what we go through. So if you can see my screen, you can see where I am, top north of the country, up in the Himalayas, or rather beyond the Himalayas. Many times people think Ladakh is in the Himalayas, but it's actually across. Himalayas are lush green like Kashmir and Shimla, but where we are, nature has left us literally high and dry, because Himalayas become a natural barrier for the monsoon clouds. So even clouds cannot cross the barrier of Himalayas. And what I see outside my window every day is looks more like Moon or Mars than planet Earth. How dry Ladakh is. When I open my windows in the mornings, I see something like this. This, by the way, is a picture of the Mars, not Ladakh. This is just to give you a better comparison and wake you up. This is how Mars looked like, but Ladakh doesn't look like very different. You know, when I open my window, this is just outside my window where I'm speaking from. And it looks very much like the previous picture, except for the signs of human activity that you can see in the front. That's all that is makes a difference between Ladakh and Mars. And you can see on the left how even the environment behaves like outer space. Great swings in temperature from plus 35 to minus 35 in winters. We are as close as it can get to outer space or another planet. So let me take you through. This is what Ladakh is, and this is what actually I'm proud of. What is very special is that green patch in the middle, the oasis. That is human contribution to this part of the planet. Otherwise, very dry like Mars or Moon, but this is what my ancestors did to this otherwise uninhabitable land called Ladakh. Any scientist today would declare this place not possible to live. It's a desert completely. But my ancestors went on to find sources of water when they saw that, you know, natural precipitation is less than 100 mm, 4 inches in a year. So they made use of the hidden fossilized water that you find in the mountains and that are called glaciers. And the trickle that comes from the glacier, they channelized and then irrigated dry patches of sand like you see there and started growing wheat and barley and peas, fruits like apricots, apples, peaches, plums, grapes and whatnot. Now, this is something that I feel proud of, but nature is rather harsh here, and we are a tiny microscopic minority, not just ethnic and linguistic, but even technological and climatic. So what works in Delhi or Mumbai do not work here. You can see at the bottom, even running a tap of water is quite a circus, as pipes freeze and burst, and you have to heat them each morning. So this is Ladakh. And now, with global warming, our glaciers are melting away, causing water shortage or droughts. And these droughts, you know, for farmers who depend on a single crop in a year are a very big challenge. But more than that, these droughts are followed by floods, flash floods. So every few years there is a flash flood punctuated by a drought. You can imagine how difficult it would be. Let me tell you why this is happening. With global warming, our glaciers are melting, and Ladakh, with the Himalayas and Hindu Kush, is the third pole of the planet after North and South Pole. This is the biggest freshwater reserve in frozen form. In this picture, which I took few days ago from the aeroplane while flying, you can see the mountains of Ladakh, and in one single picture you can see 10 glaciers. Roughly 55,000 glaciers find their home in the Hindu Kush Himalayas, and it feeds not just people in Ladakh and the mountains, but 2 billion people, 200 crores in the Indian subcontinent and in China, which is 1/4 of the planet. But these glaciers, they are melting away, and melting away very fast and not silently. You can see here the famous Brangdrum Glacier, which was a towering height just 30 years ago when I went as a child. And today it's a shadow of itself. It's melting into pools and torrents. This is how the other end, the lower end of the glacier looks. It's melting away into big torrents, and these are not peaceful. Let me show you what's happening up in the Himalayas. This is what it did. In 2006, there was a big flash flood in a valley called Phyang, where I am now. At that time, I was not here. I came here as a volunteer to help the people who had lost lives and houses and farms. And I saw an old man in his 80s and asked him how often such disasters happen. When have you seen the last one? And the old man said, I don't remember. I've only heard stories, have not seen. Well, that was 2006. The next one was 2010, when a quarter of Leh city was washed away by a big cloudburst and flash flood. This was just 4 years later. And the next one was 2015, and the next one was 2017. So this is how frequent flash floods are becoming, and these are followed by droughts, because each flash flood washes away all the fines from the mountains, and then there's nothing to absorb the rains, so they become flash floods. Now I'll share with you something very important to learn from the disasters of Ladakh, where we made big mistakes in 2010, and how we can learn for not only Ladakh, but for other places that may face similar situations. So you can see here on the right at the bottom, this was the flash floods, cloudbursts in Leh in 2010. Roughly 1,000 people were lost, and thousands of houses and farms were lost. The good thing was there was a great response from the whole nation to support Ladakh, from the government, from people and organizations. We are always grateful for that. The mistake we made was in the approach to give relief to the people. There wasn't enough efforts made to understand the local realities, the local sensitivities and sensibilities. So in a place, I was going to tell you as in the beginning that I'm presenting this as one of the learnings from the event in Leh in 2010 as per the 9th point in the 10-point agenda, learning from each disaster that happens. So in a place like Ladakh, where people live in mud houses, they are often very beautiful, and mud is very good insulating material, and they build these buildings with local resources, local skills and so on. This is how people in Ladakh live and love to live, in mud houses that are not too cold in winter and not too hot in summer. They're easy to build because the material comes free of cost. It is soil, mud, so it comes free of cost. And people help each other to build. You know, the whole community comes together to the person who needs.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Can you wind up in another 1 minute?
Yes. Okay. So this is how normally houses are built in Ladakh. But in this 2010 relief, these are what were given to the people in large numbers. Thousands of prefabricated plastic boxes were distributed out of kindness, but quite misplaced. And you can see on the right, they are just sitting there, not much use, because people can't even imagine living in boxes that don't have that thermal mass. And bamboo huts with like less than 1 centimeter thickness were distributed in large numbers. They cost 4 to 5 lakhs each, and people received them. I think people in the government and people who wanted to support thought that people will be very cold in the winter and they must give them quickly whatever they can, because it was the month of August, September, so winter was coming. But little did they know or study that Ladakh has a great social capital. It doesn't have a lot of material capital, but great social capital. So nobody goes cold or hungry in Ladakh. People help each other. So if the government had not distributed these plastic boxes and actually given the money to the people, for that winter nobody would have gone cold, because all their relatives, neighbors, whoever always hosts their people. This is how people have survived in Ladakh. So there is no such thing as homelessness in Ladakh. There is no such thing as people on the street. So this social capital we failed to understand, and we pumped in material capital in the form of these boxes, plastic. And I wrote to the Prime Minister at that time saying that these will just become plastic garbage in 2 to 3 years, and people won't be able to use them. They'll have to rebuild their mud houses with their own resources with such hardships. If this money could go to finance their own mud houses, they can help each other and build. And truly this is what happened. For the winter, no one, I repeat, no one lived in any of these shelters. They were just standing outside. They went and lived with their relatives and friends happily and warm with love and support in such disaster. And next spring, they started building their own mud houses to start their lives again, but without any support from what the nation gave. The nation lost 4 lakh, 5 lakh rupees on each of these huts, but the people in Ladakh did not receive that to start their own houses in this shape that I just shared with you. So we need to learn about the local realities and the local social capital. I repeat, not only Ladakh, India has a huge social capital. Communities help each other. It's not like New York or London, where people are on their own. Nobody will come to your help. Then you can thank for prefabricated boxes. But here, they would rather have done well with support to rebuild their house next year, rather than waste so much and generate so much garbage in the high Himalayas. So I urge you all to please learn from such disasters, and always adapt your support and relief to the local realities, and that way we'll make much use of our precious resources that donors and supporters so kindly give, and people can be helped. So this is all I wanted to send as a message from Ladakh, to learn from the disasters of 2010 and count on social capital and give them what they live in rather than something they'll never use. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was our celebrity guest, Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, who is the founder director of the Students' Education and Cultural Movement in Ladakh, talking about disasters and disaster management in Ladakh. And of course, he's also more popular by the movie Three Idiots, where his character was played by Mr. Amir Khan. Thank you once again, Mr. Sonam Wangchuk, for joining us from all the way from Ladakh. And now we need to move on with our session, which is on infrastructure and city resilience, including Peri-urban. And may I invite our distinguished session chair, Professor Ravi Sinha, Professor IIT Mumbai. Let's put our hands together to welcome him. I invite our session moderator, Dr. Amit Proti, Director General CDRI. A very warm welcome to you, sir. I'm also inviting our eminent panelists, Shri Sanjeev Bansal, DG ERNET, Government of India. Warm welcome to you, sir. Shri Manish Dubey, Chief of Practice, Indian Institute for Human Settlements, Bengaluru. Warm welcome. Inviting Dr. Aditya V. Bahadur, Principal Researcher, Urban Resilience Lead, and Chair Research Strategy, Team IIED. Warm welcome. Professor Fiona Marshall, Professor of Environment and Development, University of Sussex Business School, will be joining us on the virtual mode. And I invite Shri Manoj Dabas, Deputy Chief of the Party, ICRAF, and Dr. Himanshu Shekhar, Associate Academic Officer, UNUEHS, Bonn, Germany. So, ladies and gentlemen, our session chair, Professor Ravi Sinha, is Professor and former Dean of Alumni and Corporate Relations at IIT Bombay. His research activities are mainly in earthquake engineering, structural engineering, and disaster risk management. He is closely associated with policy making related to disaster risk management in India. He has chaired and served in several government panels, is also a member of the Maharashtra State Disaster Management Authority, and is the co-chairman of the National Panel of Experts of Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, Government of India. And moderator, Shri Amit Prothi, is the Director General Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI. He brings a wealth of international experience and expertise on climate and disaster resilience issues. He is an international expert with nearly 25 years of progressive leadership in the fields of urban planning and resilient infrastructure, with experience across more than 15 countries. And with those words of introduction, I hand over to our chairperson, Dr. Amit Prothi, to kindly carry forward the proceedings of this session. And sir, the time duration is approximately 1 hour, 15 minutes. Over to you.
Can I sit and do it? Or do I have to?
So you can sit and do it.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And I'm really, on a cold winter morning in Delhi, even 11 o'clock seems hard to get out sometimes. But I'm glad to see some, smiley faces, some faces that are looking at me very curiously, ki aaj kya sunenge hum? But, after such a wonderful session we just had, it's hard to actually beat somebody who's on the ground, in the front line, and dealing with disasters on a day-to-day basis. I think sometimes it feels unreal that we're sitting in a conference space and actually talking about it. But we should, because there's lots of learning we can actually learn from each other, and we've got such a wonderful panel here and online. So I'm really excited to actually get some nuggets of good information today for all of you, for myself, to actually take forward. We have an esteemed panelists, set of panelists here coming from a variety of backgrounds. I think the intention really is, in 1 hour, don't want to overload you with things, but are there nuggets of information, 1, 2, 3 key points that each of us can offer that benefit this larger conversation on urbanization, infrastructure, peri-urban context, etc. Why is the topic important? I think all of you, actually, how many of you in this room work on urban issues? Can you just raise your hands? Okay, so I would guess about 1/4. So not everybody. So people who are not working on urban, maybe for your benefit, we are already living in a world which is 50% and above of the population is living in cities. Yeah? So there's already, if you look at the concentration of where people are living, more than half of the world is living in cities. Yeah? And that's going to continue to grow. So if you look at all of the patterns, all of the estimates, it's really showing that we are living more and more and more and more in cities, and there's an argument for that. Cities is where you have your wealth of economic concentration, you've got your jobs, you've got your best hospitals, you've got some of the best schools, you've got Professor Sinha from IIT Mumbai. Well, IIT is one of the premier universities and it's located in Mumbai. Similarly, Chennai, Delhi, etc. So cities are where you have some of your best infrastructure for social infrastructures, your economic infrastructure, your cultural assets. Cities are really important. And as we are seeing, and we heard it from Dr. Wangchuk as well, because of this concentration, when there is an event, it could be a flood, it could be an earthquake, it could be a cyclone, cities are where the impact gets felt a lot, and cities is where the damage also is experienced a lot. So when you start adding up the numbers of people killed, when you start adding up the number of assets lost, you realize that the concentration in cities actually makes it much more, exacerbates the issue quite a bit. So that's just a very brief introduction of why we need to think about urbanization and cities. Overlapping that, we are experiencing climate change. It's not something that's happening overnight, but already this year we see that it was one of the warmest years in the world. If you open up your newspapers, look at BBC, look at CNN, look at Times of India, you're seeing more and more disasters on your front pages. And that is part of it is related to poor urban development. We are building things in a way we shouldn't be building, but part of it is also related to climate change. So I'm just setting that context of cities, climate change exacerbating risks, urban development, poor urban development exacerbating risks, as just to start this conversation. I'm also expecting that each of the panelists here comes from a different background. So we've got people thinking about governance, we've got people thinking about tech, we've got people thinking about nature-based solutions. So I'd like to hear from them just different perspectives on how are they trying to address this challenging, growing risks in cities, and what can we do differently going into the future. With that, I'd like to introduce our chair of this session. And it's best, I've realized, that not to do that extempo, but read people's bios, because sometimes you can say the wrong thing to the wrong person, which doesn't help. Professor Ravi Sinha is professor of at IIT Mumbai. He is the former dean of alumni and corporate relationships at IIT Bombay. His research activities are mainly in earthquake engineering, structural engineering, and disaster risk management. Professor Sinha is closely associated with policy making related to disaster risk management in India. Professor Sinha has served on several government panels. He also has extensive experience in urban disaster risk management and is a co-author of the World Bank's primer on climate resilient cities. Professor Sinha, I'd like to have some opening words from you.
Thanks. Thanks, Dr. Proti. I would just like to highlight a few issues of why this topic and this session is so important. So first of all, let us look at the last few hundred years in perspective. The story of cities is actually the story of modern civilization. We would not have modern civilization if we did not have urbanization, if we did not have cities. And why is it so? Is because urbanization allows concentration of not just people, but concentration of assets, concentration of facilities in a way, and also the opportunity to share them in a way which makes it far more cost effective to use them than ever in the history of human civilization. So well-being of the cities and the people who live in the cities is actually intricately linked to ensuring the well-being of the society. And that is a reality, and that is a reality being even much more reinforced with time because of increasing urbanization. So that being so, do we need to have a different strategy or different lens to look at disaster risks and sustainability issues in the urban areas? That's something on which we are going to hear our distinguished delegates over here to give their perspective from different points of view. But I want you to look at the discussions which are going on, keeping in mind firmly the unique nature of the problem facing us, and that is that if we don't have cities which are doing well, or if we don't have cities which are healthy, then we don't have societies and humanity which is healthy. So that's all I would like to say, and I would like to request the moderator to take over again.
Thank you, Sinha. Professor Sinha, I think that's, thank you for introducing the topic. I'm going to start first with Manish Dubey. Manish, where are you? I'm also meeting everybody for the phone. Yeah, great, thank you. It's funny, I've met Professor Sinha, but some of, so excuse me if I don't know where you're sitting, but. The reason I want to start with Manish is, he's coming from the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, and at COP27, IHS was one of the main authors of taking the IPCC report. IPCC is the big climate change reports that are put out at a global scale. IHS, with a team of others, took that and looked at it in the urban context to understand what are the climate risks in the urban context. So I thought it would be good for us to start with Manish, just to give us some talking points from what is it that they found in the IPCC reports as it relates to climate change and cities. I will introduce Manish first. So Manish Dubey is the Chief of Practice at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements. He's a governance and development expert with nearly 25 years of consulting experience with national and state governments, multilateral and bilateral partners, INGOs and philanthropies. His experience spans the rural and urban water supply and sanitation, urban development, natural resource management, and rural livelihood sectors across 20 Indian states. Key areas of Manish's work include institutional design and strengthening, program design and strategy, reform management support, strategic stakeholder communication and sector, portfolio and program level result management. So Manish, over to you. I think it will be good to hear from you. What are some of the key findings from the latest IPCC report focused on cities that I just helped prepare? And then how are some of the key findings on adaptation being disseminated to local governments and effectively being adopted by urban and infrastructure practitioners? Over to you.
How much time do I have?
You have about 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay. Maybe I'll just stand up. It's easier. So thanks for the opportunity. Good to be before you. Amit spoke about the report that we brought out. I'll also weave in some of the other insights from other themes that we've been working on and highlight 3 or 4 sort of crucial things. I think there's a meta-level issue that we're talking about. The whole question of resilience in the first place. We are in a dicey world. We are seeing more and more disasters happening. Climate is sort of making it worse. More people, more infrastructure are coming at the crosshairs of disasters. And the global climate economically is in not such a great place at the moment. We are looking at a slowdown. We are looking at spiking energy and food prices. And the threat is that unless we plan for a more resilient world, a world where not only people can survive, but thrive despite all the stresses and shocks, we are writing ourselves a prescription for a very unjust future and a huge amount of social unrest. That's one big picture stuff. The second, cities are very crucial to our imagination of a resilient world. Some reasons Amit already spoke about. More than half the population lives in cities. 80% of all economic action in the world happens in cities. This is in an area, the global area is total about the size of Egypt. We are packing in half the world's population, 80% of the economic activity in such a small area. Unless we address the resilience in cities, this is going to become a problem. Professor Sinha said this, and very rightly, that cities are also the place where talent, innovation, finance, all cluster together. So also great, and 75% of the emissions also happen from cities. A great place to start. So it's a great canvas. Cities are a great canvas to start with. Specifically on the question of infrastructure, there's a conundrum here. We know infrastructure is good. It's good for quality of life. It's good for firm productivity. It's good for economic development. It's good for job creation, all the good things that we need in the world. We know that much of the infrastructure, both within and outside cities of the future, is yet to be built. We have a golden chance of doing it right, doing it better. We know that the cost of resilient infrastructure, it does not add much, just about 3% to the upfront capex. We know that it pays back 4 times more in terms of net benefits. We know that infrastructure investments, by and large, offer more stable returns as far as investment is concerned. And we know that there is money floating around. There's 300 billion of dry powder private capital that is there, that is waiting to invest itself. There's 120 trillion amount lying with global institutional investors. It will take care of the whole world's needs for the next 20 years for SDGs and for infrastructure if we are to leverage it. And yet that infrastructure is not happening. 2 big picture reasons why it might not be happening. One is we have not gauged our risks well enough. We have not understood them well enough. We have not communicated them well enough. If we had done that, our cities would not be pushing people and infrastructure into known unsafe zones We would be using our natural ecosystems as natural buffers rather than overriding them and creating infrastructure that gets flooded. We just not have grappled with the idea of risk. It's not seeped in. We are not planning well enough for it. And the second big reason, we are not, as far as financing is concerned, and this is often made out to be a big thing, is the money is there. Where are the projects? Why are there not enough, and I'm talking about at the global scale, outside of North America and Europe, why are there not enough projects that provide investors, they assure them that they will be delivered on time, that will give them the returns that infrastructure promises, that will take care of political and sort of macroeconomic stability? Why is it not there? And essentially the why it is not there, and to make that happen, the multilaterals have to play a big role. They have to start supporting national and subnational governments and city governments in creating those pipelines, providing the necessary enhancement guarantees and so on, so that these projects built, there's a need, there's proven that it will pay itself back well, and yet it's not happening. There has to be that traction there. Also, and this is a point that often gets missed out as far as governance is concerned, and this is where I wear my governance hat, that at the end of the day, any infrastructure that comes up in any city or anywhere else for that matter, the capex might come from other sources, public or private. The money ultimately will have to be forked out by local governments and local utilities, and they will at least partially have to dig it out of people's pockets. Unless their finances are fixed, this is going to remain an issue. Last two more points. We know what needs to be done. We need better planning. We need better risk assessment. We need better instruments, better incentivized instruments so that infrastructure and people locate at the right place, that we use our natural ecosystems as better buffers, and so on and so forth. We know that infrastructure O&M has to be fixed, so that because infrastructure ultimately performs as well as it is maintained. We know early warning systems are important. There are 4 or 5 things, and we all know that. And this has happened. This has happened in various places at various points of time. It has happened piecemeal and not at the scale at which it is required. The tools can be sharpened, sure, but the approaches are there. Where do we go from here, therefore? We need to make sure that these tools can keep getting refined, and there's always a case for that. The next step is also to take on these lessons that we are learning and amplify it to the larger global community and say, here, this has been done, take the cue from this, run with it. The solutions are available, we just need to push them harder enough, disseminate them enough. Second most important, and this is something that all of us who have lived in Indian cities would have known, the key issue here is of institutional fragmentation. The utilities, planning authorities, local governments, an n number of utilities and parasitans operating in the same space. Even if one of them chooses to fix a part of the jigsaw, unless it aggregates to unless all we will not realize the resilience. And that's a tough one. Having said that, last minute. In India at least, and in several parts of the world, we have seen big change happen. In a reasonably short span of time, I'm talking specifically, which have had their imperfections. But we have moved them into meaningfully, and there are 3 or 4 things that have really happened. Despite the institutional fragmentation, despite the weak municipal governance, there has been a concerted political push, there has been dedicated funding support, there has been some effort made at structural capacity building, and between those 3 things, we have made meaningful dents. And so when we are talking global, talking of taking these small piecemeal solutions happening, aggregating them to a particular location, scaling it up, that is what we need. On that note, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manish. And my next round, I'm going to ask you for one specific example of what you just talked about. So you got some time to think about it. But since you mentioned institutional fragmentation, I thought maybe I'll bring Aditya in at this point. Aditya, you've been thinking about this for a long time. Urban governance is something that you spend time in academia and otherwise. So I'm going to come to you with a question on governance, but maybe first I need to introduce who Aditya is. Dr. Aditya Bahadur is principal researcher and urban resilience lead and chair research strategy team at the International Institute for Environmental Development. He's a specialist in climate resilient urban development, transformative approaches for risk reduction, monitoring and evaluation of resilience initiatives, designing and delivering research and learning programs on climate and development, supporting governments in policy and institutional development for resilience, with focus on South and Southeast Asia. Aditya is also the chair of IIED's internal research strategy, which focuses on steering the content and maintaining oversight of the institute's strategy. Aditya, I think, you've been, we recognize, Manish talked about this concept of, and even in the room, I'm sure people sitting here are coming from very, very, very different disciplinary backgrounds. This sense of fragmentation is often in the resilience narrative we are criticizing. We are saying we need to be more integrated, we need to coordinate, we need to cross disciplinary boundaries, whether it's on engineering, whether it's urban planning, whether it's social. So, this thing has been talked about a lot in the resilience space. So from your perspective and from your, the time you've been spending thinking about it, what are some of the interesting approaches that you've seen, and maybe highlight one or two examples if you can, to integrate resilience into our urban infrastructure governance, particularly in the global south? So over to you.
Sure, thank you very much. I'm very grateful for being invited today to speak. And yeah, I think the opening remarks were really interesting and comprehensive. I'll try and keep this short. I think the speakers that have preceded me have already underlined the critical importance of the urban context. Not only do more than 1 in every 2 people in the world now live in cities, cities are also responsible for something like, I think, 75 or 80% of the world's GDP. The challenge is that they're also on the front lines of the battle against climate change. 75% of all greenhouse gases are produced in cities, and cities contain vast numbers of vulnerable people. Something like 33% as a rule of thumb of all cities across the world are informal. And in the global south, the percentage of informality is higher. In some of the most at-risk cities, it's something like 60 or 70% of people living in informal settlements. This means that there are almost 1 billion people across the world living in cities that earn less than $2 a day and don't really have the capacity to withstand the shocks and stresses that climate change is bringing to our doorstep. So that's the context in which we're operating. Now, we overlay this context with the fact that the nature of shocks and stresses that cities across the world are facing are shifting. And there are at least 4 key shifts taking place, which I think are underappreciated. One is shocks and stresses are becoming more intense. Piece of research that looked at extreme rainfall in India over the last 50 years or so found that incidences of extreme rainfall events have doubled in that period. And similar research from different countries across the world, including extreme heat events in the United States, corroborates this intensification of shocks and stresses. At the same time, we're seeing an extensification of shocks and stresses. Disasters are becoming more extensive. Not only are individual disasters impacting large numbers of assets and people, multiple concomitant disasters are happening at the same time, wreaking havoc in different places across the world. I'm sure there are people here from Odisha. Odisha was battling the Delta wave, if I'm not mistaken, while also facing the onslaught of Cyclone Amphan, which severely stressed the renowned disaster risk management capacities of Odisha for a number of reasons, including, as one example, the fact that cyclone evacuation centers were being used as COVID isolation centers when the cyclone struck. So in this way, the extensification of risk is changing things. Frequency is becoming more. We all know then that 1 in 100, 1 in 200 year events are going to happen more and more frequently. And finally, risks are becoming teleconnected. This is just a fancy way of saying that something that happens in one part of the world is leading to a disaster in another part of the world due to the densification of economic and social networks. A few years ago, there was a hurricane in the car-producing parts of Thailand, and that led to catastrophic failures in car manufacturing in Chile, in Brazil, in Vietnam, in Pakistan, which had a lot of downstream economic impacts on people involved with that industry. So it's becoming very difficult to anticipate where one event will lead to a disaster in another country entirely. Now, I'm saying this because what we found is, even though there is such a substantial shift in the nature of risks that cities are facing across the world, there isn't that much of a shift in ways in which we've been managing risk in cities. I feel we're still aligning with sort of traditional approaches of doing things. And a key part of that is the governance puzzle, Amit, that you talked about. But embedded within that are at least 5 shifts that we need to make. One is, we can't do anything substantial on building resilience unless we have the right amount of data. And we're seeing time and time again that traditional approaches to understanding who is vulnerable, who is exposed, what kind of hazards are going to strike a city are not bearing fruit. This is because there are problems of granularity. So you can look at satellite images, but looking at satellite images in extremely high resolution can be expensive, time consuming. Or there are issues of certainty, where you might get a climate model that gives you a broad picture of what the trends are going to be in a broad span of time. It's never going to tell you that the temperature in Vigyan Bhavan in 2035 is going to be 1.25 degrees higher than average. So doesn't really support decision making. But so what I've been arguing is that the time is ripe for us to complement these existing ways of understanding climate impacts with new and innovative approaches that are more decentralized and disaggregated. And this means the use of big data approaches as well as analog approaches. I'll give you one very quick example of both. Understanding air temperature in cities is notoriously difficult because it varies block by block depending on urban geomorphologies. But a really innovative startup in the States, what they figured out is that every Android phone in the world is constantly monitoring its battery temperature. So they've developed an app where they collect this battery temperature, and through an algorithm, they've converted battery temperature data into air temperature data. So now they are crowdsourcing extremely precise air temperature information from cities, from 500,000 mobile phones spread across cities, which allows them to model heat waves over time. So very soon, the city of Paris, when the heat wave is coming, will not need to blanket the city with cooling centers. They can target particular neighborhoods more than others. And in terms of analog approaches, we don't need to look far. Slum Dwellers International has been doing self-enumeration work for decades, where slum dwellers survey themselves in a structured and valid manner to make their problems seen to policymakers. So we need to kind of shift away from existing approaches that rely heavily on modeling, heavily on GIS, all of which are great but need to be complemented. And I worry I'm running out of time, so I'm going to limit my 5 points to 3 and then come back to the others later. I also think there is a critical piece here on embracing informality. At the beginning, I talked about the amount of urban population that lives in informal settlements. In some cities, it's up to 70%. And time again, we see that when we plan for resilience, there is an assumption that the informal sector doesn't really exist, right? We look at a city resilience plan or a master plan and then mainstream risk into these formal planning mechanisms. But all you need to do is look up from that map and look outside the window to see that there's very little correlation between what the master plan says and what is happening in a second or third tier city in India. So unless we actually build institutions where we're embracing people who live in informal settlements, we're not really going to get very far, and we need to embrace informal actors. So for instance, there are examples from Swaziland, which is called Eswatini now, I think, and Ghana, and in China, where people from informal settlements join formal planning processes and mediate the relationship between governments and informal settlers, so that the informal settlers understand the government's compulsions and the government understands what's really happening in the informal settlements. As a result of this, in Ghana, there was a slum that was slated for eviction and demolition and relocation But after they did this exercise with informal actors, they found that there were far too many people living in that slum. Then the government didn't realize how many people lived there, as a result of which this whole exercise was cancelled. Because there would be an internal displacement disaster if they had gone through with what they had planned. We need to also embrace informal knowledge, where we need to co-create these plans with people living in informal settlements. And we need to also appropriate informal practices. And again, I don't need to look too far. I see the logo for Seeds here. They've done some remarkable work after the Gujarat earthquake in the early 2000s, where they realized that, sensibly realized that the reconstruction of Gujarat is not going to happen with formal people with engineering degrees and hard hats and high visibility vests. It's going to happen by informal artisans who are semi-professional, operate, fairly informally. So they trained these informal actors in resilient building practices, developed a federation that allowed reconstruction in Gujarat to happen much more effectively, to deliver a much greater degree of resilience than would have if they'd just gone down a formal route. And then my final point is on engaging communities. Now, overall, when we talk about urban resilience, and especially when we talk about urban resilience as it happened through bilateral and multilateral actors, community engagement has been limited to projects that range from 3 to 5 years. These focus on fairly short-term problems, fairly proximate issues, and don't really get to the heart of the matter. And again, we don't need to look too far to understand what a structural approach to dealing with community resilience needs to look like. Shiraz Bhai and Nivedita here from the Gorakhpur Environmental Action Group, they led an incredible project in Gorakhpur that I was privileged to be on the peripheries of, where the proximate problem was urban flooding and waterlogging, as it's called here. And so they could have used the funds that they had got from a philanthropic organization to redo the drains and dust their hands and say, great, we solved the problems. But they actually took a much more systemic, structural approach. They found out, okay, there's flooding because the drains are not operating. The drains are not operating because they're full of garbage. They're full of garbage because the waste management system is not working. The waste management system is not working because there's lack of accountability between the local government and people who are being affected by flooding. So instead of fixing the drains, they mobilize the community to put pressure on the local government to find a comprehensive and sustainable solution to this problem, which then led to a step change and a paradigm shift in the risk that these people faced, because the government stepped in. And in the next municipal election, I know Shiraz Bhai won't mention this, but I can, the municipal corporator was also changed, because the local community was now educated and empowered to understand that he was not playing a helpful role in this whole process. So that is an example of a structural solution to a fairly proximate problem that we need to move towards. And I think these are the kinds of thrusts that we need to look at when we talk about governance for climate resilience, as opposed to thinking of only policies or institution embedded within pollution departments or environment departments.
Thank you so much, Aditya. And I know that with you, I can always spend hours getting into these conversations, because there is so much richness. Even in the 5, you went over 5, but that's okay. No, it's fine. I think talked about informality, talked about the data. We're starting to see new ways of data collection. Big data on one end. I'm familiar with examples of people using your app. We're all traveling using Google Maps, right? And that is getting shown for us as traffic maps. But similarly, in flood areas, people are actually capturing what's going on real time and translating that into flood maps. Where in Jakarta, Uber drivers were using maps that were generated real time to avoid areas which they could figure out were flooded real time. Right? So there's a lot of new innovation happening in the tech space, which is going to bring me to the next speaker, who is working in the tech space. I would like to introduce Sanjeev Bansalji. So, okay, thank you. Sanjeev Bansal is the Director General of Education and Research Network India. Before joining EarNet, he was working as an advisor with the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. Shri Sanjeev Bansal possesses about 30 years of professional experience in diverse fields of information and communication technologies. has been in leadership positions in the area of policies and regulations, technology development, project management, marketing, material management, training, capacity building, procurement, and contract management and consumers affairs. Sanjeev ji, I think, we've gone from maybe 1G to now, I remember 2G, then 3G, then 4G, now 5G. The whole telecom space is changing, but so is technology, right? So a lot of new technologies emerging on a daily basis. I feel like my gray hair doesn't help me in this field sometimes, because I look to my young staff colleagues and they're able to say, sir, you don't know how to use WhatsApp, and you don't know how to use this, and you don't know how to use technology. And, in a way, I'm looking to them really to tell us how does one use technology, because it's changing and the opportunity is incredibly immense. I mean, it is really, really, if you actually think about one of the ways of addressing some of our problems, technology has to be the solution, right? So I would love to hear from you in this context of urban resilience. How does one think of technology and what are the opportunities emerging? So over to you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I thank all the organizers to invite me for this August session where learned speakers are there and there's a lot of learning opportunity. As far as ICT technologies are concerned, we are all aware that for last 3 years, we are undergoing biggest disaster of this century. And had there not been ICT technologies, you could have imagined what would have been our situation. We were all locked down inside home, but had there not been technology, mobile technology, internet, online kind of e-commerce or online payment facilities, the life would have been much, much more difficult. So the role of ICT technologies is very, very important as far as disaster management is concerned, including city infrastructure and resilience. Whether it is prevention of disaster, whether it is detection of disaster, whether it is reduction of disaster, whether it is rescue and relief operation, or whether rehabilitation. In every part of the disaster management, ICT has got very, very important role to play. And we know currently the technologies which we use particularly, whether to take the path of where the cyclone is moving, what is the damage size of earthquake, or where flash flood is moving. Everywhere we use the technology to map the damage and to help in rescue and relief operation. So far we have been using technology of satellite for radio mobile network, for connecting ourselves through mobile technologies and through internet. Then GIS and remote sensing is very, very important, by which we can take picture, we can place the data, and we can move our images to see what can be the predictability should be there, and what can be the how much is the affected area, and how relief and rescue operations can be done. Going forward, we are going for a big way in IoT kind of technology, sensors. Of course, some of the sensors have been placed, but many more in this field is required to be done, wherein we can get the real-time data, we can process the data, we can generate the application, and we can proliferate this whole thing using the technology. Coming to the future kind of things, now drones have got very, very important role to play in assessing the disaster, in managing the disaster, in mapping the whole thing, and to reach in those areas which are inaccessible for the human, or which are very difficult to reach, or which are cost effective in nature. AI and ML is coming in a big way, which can be where we can use the data which is available, past data, to process that data and to predict based on the machine learning applications and big data analytics, that how the things may unfold and what preventive actions can be taken. Sir has talked about the 5G technology, which is really will kind of act as a game changer actually. Recently, on the 1st of October, Honorable Prime Minister has inaugurated the 5G services in this country, and all the operators are in the process of rolling out the network. The beauty part of 5G technology is this. Presently, the network which we are having of 3G network or 4G network, initially we had 2G network, which are less flexible in nature. But in case of 5G technologies, the networks are very flexible. You can design the network through the software the way you want. Whether there is a function called network function virtualization or network slicing, where you can design the network as per the need. Whenever there is a disaster, if there is a need to have a high mobile broadband speed is required, you can design the network through software then and there itself. If you want to connect masses through mobile network, you can do so. If there are critical applications where you need to make some robotic surgery, or you can flying the drone, etc., where low latency applications are very, very important, that can also be done by 5G technology which is unfolding. So this is a very big area which is coming for all kind of disaster management things. Satellite, of course, there is a recent change in the technology where mostly presently we do the communication through geostationary satellites. Now we are going for low Earth orbit satellite. We are going for medium Earth satellite. These technologies, when they will come, you will have the broadband through using the satellite technology. You can have handsets. So presently, the problem which normally is faced, that whenever there is any disaster is striking, whether in the form of earthquake or in the form of cyclone or flash flood, etc., there is a massive physical damage of the infrastructure itself, where it is very difficult to communicate with each other because of the damage of the infrastructure. So that problem can be addressed largely when we go for the satellite-based thing, so that at least ground infrastructure will, even if it is affected, will not affect us in terms of relief and rescue operations. And of course, social network services are very, very important, using social sites like Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., which are, they not only play the role of disseminating the information or generating awareness, but to get reading the SMS during that time, we can judge that what is going on at the ground level, and by analyzing the information or which is we are getting, we can take corrective action. And recently we have come out with common alerting protocol, in particularly in disaster prone areas, where whenever there is a sensing of any kind of disaster which is impending, through common alerting protocol, messages can be transferred very, very easily by all mode of communication, whether it is mobile, whether it is internet, whether it is on your laptop, iPad, or through radio, loudspeaker, any kind of information. The common alerting protocol, you can do it. Coming to the important part, this is the part of the technology. Another part is the use of the technology. So when we were working in TRI, before coming to Arnet India, we had given good recommendations which are actually practical in nature. One recommendation which we had given to the government about to have the single emergency number, just like 911 we have in US, we have given recommendation we should have 112 as the single emergency number for our country. Many of the states, government has accepted those recommendations. Many states have, they have implemented, like in Delhi now, instead of 100 for police, you can see that 112 they have written in all the police vans, etc. Gradually many more states are going. That is one thing. Second thing, we said that whenever there is a physical damage of the infrastructure or wherever there is a disaster, roaming facility should be allowed across the operators, meaning thereby if there is a damage of infrastructure of Airtel, the call should get matured through Reliance Jio network or BSNL network or Idea network. Similarly, vice versa. So that is also government has accepted, and that is implemented. For 15 days time, you get free of cost roaming facility. Whoever networks, operator's network is available, you will get the at least communication. Third thing which we had worked was about the priority call routing. Priority call routing means whenever there is a disaster, then of course all near and dear friends, family member, they try to reach to the person who are affected in those areas. So that time those agencies which are responsible for rescue and relief operations, they are not, for them a network doesn't get access to them. So we had recommended that there should be some precedence and, kind of you break the, if based on the priority which is given to the different functionaries of relief and rescue operation, their call should get matured first. Either they can be put in queue first, or they can break the existing communication and their call should get through. So that is also one point which we had given, and of course some work is going on that. And last but not the least was about the GPS enable, because in all smartphone we have the GPS connectivity, but in feature phone it is not there. So whenever there is something happens and somebody is dialing say 112 and he is not able to communicate, then at least the person who is receiving the call should know that from where this call has come, from where it to. And we have got very significant large number of, still almost 40-45% feature phones are there. So to cover a larger masses, it is very important that these feature phones should also have the GPS enabled capability so that we can know the location of that. So these are all very, very important things. We should use the technology in a very big manner. And thanks to, COVID, of course, has given its own negative effect, but it has given one very positive thing that he has made every one of us a very, techno-savvy kind of thing. We do not now fear making video call or making conference call or doing online communication or online, payment, etc. Everybody, this is the right platform when we can take it to the next level as far as disaster mitigation and reduction and all form of disaster management is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for highlighting that. And, as I was listening to you, I was thinking of examples in my own life. I was in Kathmandu during the earthquake, and phone calls were not going through. And what I remembered from a previous event was so the moment I was experiencing the earthquake, I sent a text message to my wife saying I'm okay. Because for the next hour, there was no way to communicate. So you can imagine, somebody on the other end of the line doesn't have a clue whether you're okay or not. And technology plays such a big role in this human connectivity and I'm glad to hear that things are changing. One thing to think about is because India's now, all of the smart cities have built 100 command and control centers. I'm really curious to see, and maybe you can answer this in the next round, are those centers being used effectively in the space of disaster management, particularly when it comes to use of technology? Yeah. And one example I just wanted to articulate was I was in the city of Seoul, and Seoul has a really brilliant emergency management system where when you get a phone call, they're immediately able to direct it to again one number. Yeah. It comes into the call center, and I've seen this one working on the other side, and the operator picks up the call. He has a red light, green light, yellow light. Is it an emergency? He'll immediately sort of direct it to the right person. They have doctors on call. So if you have reported somebody next to you is having a heart attack and you call them, they will call your phone, get on the video, and the doctor sitting in the emergency site will give you advice till the ambulance gets there. Right? So all of this last minute linkages also technology allows. So thank you for highlighting that. Do we have Professor Marshall on the line? I'm looking at the organizers also. Okay, maybe I'll go to the next person. So I'm going to shift here a little bit to nature-based solutions. So I think one of the terms that one is also hearing a lot, particularly when you're talking about heat and flooding, is the use of natural materials or natural systems to actually reduce the risk. And there are examples now. Bangkok created a new massive urban park, which is also working as a flood mitigation park. When you look at issues of extreme heat, there's enough evidence that shows if you plant trees and if you have greener areas, those are typically much less hotter than areas where there are fewer trees. And we have a person here today who's actually spent a lot of time in that space of introducing vegetation to the city, partly also from a purpose of reducing long-term risk from climate change and other increasing risks in the cities. So I'm going to turn to Manoj Dabas, who's the Deputy Chief of Party at ICRAF. ICRAF is the International Council for Research in Agroforestry. He's currently engaged in USAID's Trees Outside Forest in India program. The program aims to bring together farmers, private entities, and businesses to expand tree cover in India in non-forest landscapes. The purpose is to really address concerns regarding both pollution but also habitat loss, as I think all of us are starting to realize. Cities are, in the urban context, habitat loss is a big issue, as is loss of biodiversity. Manoj, I'm going to ask you, I think it'll be good. We're hearing different perspectives: data, technology, governance, finance, but also now from your side. What are some of the good solutions that have been that you're seeing getting implemented in cities that could be replicated and scaled? Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, sir, and thank you for the organizers to allow me to be here and put together, present my thoughts. The task assigned to me as a part of this panel is to cite some nature-based solutions that have been implemented in cities and can be scaled up. Well, there are thousands. As I walked to this hall, I must have crossed at least 500 of those nature-based solutions, which can be readily scaled up. They are waiting to be scaled up. I'm talking about trees in urban landscapes. They are many, but too few to compare to what exactly is needed. Now, there are a lot of technological solutions that I learned from previous speakers, which are wonderful, excellent, and I'm sure, with passage of time, Indian society will, reach a level of evolution where they'll start using those solutions on a daily basis. A lot of solutions that we talk about, are on the drawing board. A lot of them are quite elitist, require smartphones, iPads, ability to understand language, ability to, connect to those telecom networks, which unfortunately 90% of the people in this country at the moment lack. I, as a patriot, would like that number to increase very fast. But I know no matter how hard I wish, it is going to take some time. So probably it's also time for the society to go back to the basics. Some time back, Jhelum flooding happened in Srinagar, and it was a major disaster. But very few people, apart from a few learned ones who are in this room, will actually say that that disaster happened because humanity was where it should not have been, on the downside floodplain of Jhelum. Delhi can face the same disaster tomorrow. We are very lucky that we don't leave any water in Yamuna to flood Delhi. Forget about, we are barely able to meet our drinking water needs, even after exploiting groundwater to the hilt. So in Delhi, it's not that we are a resilient city, we are just lucky that there is no water in Yamuna. Sometime back in a conference in Delhi, one very eminent scientist was giving very great counts of coliform, oxygen, biological oxygen demand of Yamuna, etc., how it can be improved. So somebody, semi-literate person like me, stood up and said that all these things can be done, just release water from Hathirikund barrage into Yamuna, and all these studies that we are doing probably may not be needed for the next 10 years. So we are trying to find technological solutions to very, very generic problems which can be sorted out by going back to the basics. We are sitting in nature's way. What is happening in Joshimath today is because the town came up on loose moraine debris where the town should not have come up, and trees should have been there. Trees are a shield to the ground lying underneath, allows the land, the ground underneath, to make itself healthy over a period of time by protecting it from the elements. And when the trees are gone, what happens when climatic events happen. Now, livability of a city is not only infrastructure, flyovers, flood control mechanisms, engineering solutions. I have a finite life of 70 to 80 to 90 to 100 years, depending on how lucky I am. Now, compelled to live that life in a place that leaves no tranquility, that leaves no sanity, is a disaster at a personal level. So trees help mitigate those disasters too. A walk in a park, a stroll in a wooded lot brings my blood pressure down. It brings my anxieties down. It helps me to face my problems of the day, of tomorrow, of day after in a far more confident way. And if you are packed like sardines, like 70% of Delhi's population lives in areas where all you can hear is the radio coming from the next thing, is a disaster that is not going to happen. It has already happened, and we are just living through it. So trees and green spaces, they go a long way in mitigating these human disasters at an individual level too. Those of us who are lucky in living in organized planned layouts will also realize that it's not only having green areas, but how they're distributed across the city. Now, somebody will say that Delhi has got 49%, green areas. Yes, but where that green area is? If that green area is in a district forest, which is 100 square kilometers at one edge of Delhi, and 80% of the city's population cannot access that. So distribution of these tree-based landscapes across the city is equally important. There has to be a tiered approach. There has to be a park. There has to be a district park. There has to be a city forest. So these things need to be looked into. Now, disaster happen when cities grow up. Cities grow beyond their limits. Urban planning and urban green spaces are linked. In our cities, first of all, urban planning as a concept is actually missing in more than 3/4 of the small towns and cities that we see outside big metros and who have got development authorities. Urban planning is not there. Cities grow very, very organically without any much long-term approach being followed. And the rate at which we are urbanizing, 20 years down the line, the first interface that a child will have with nature, it will happen in cities, not in rural areas, because more than 50% of the population is going to be living in cities. So I'm not a technology person. I really laud the efforts which are happening in the technological domain, but I believe that humanity needs to go back to the basics. We need to inject trees into our landscapes. We need to, not only in the number of trees, but qualitatively. You see jamun trees in NDMC areas. I'm told that more than 1,000 tons of jamun is harvested from those cities, from those trees, and actually sold in Delhi, and half of the vendors who roam around in localities selling the jamun, it comes from these areas. Now, trees in urban landscapes, they also enhance your food security. Cities have the capacity to grow at least 50% of their food even within city limits. Cities like Singapore, cities like Vancouver, they have made this happen. A lot of those solutions will take some time because our cities, we are waking up to the reality of urbanization now. India never took its urbanization very seriously. Our worries about urban development are probably 15 years old. Before that, urbanization used to happen. The urban constituency was very small. It was not a part of the political mindscape. Now this is happening, so we need to go back and undo a lot of things which have happened. And that's where the schemes to redevelop these cities, to reduce the density of our cities, especially in unorganized layouts, will play a major role. We are implementing a project in India which is called Trees Outside Forests. India has got 33% policy mandate to have 33% forest cover. Forest area is only 21%. Where will that additional 10% come from? It will come from areas outside those forest cover. And urban India has to be a very important part of that tree cover to happen, because these trees, they number one, prevent disasters from happening. They reduce the intensity of disasters. In case they happen, nature will take its course every now and then. It used to take earlier too, it is taking now. Nowadays we have more media attention, and obviously there is the intensity induced by climatic factors. Cities mitigate those disasters once they happen, and they help the society to recover much faster. So the idea is to respect technology, but also to go back to the basics, that trees are an inherent part of human existence and they need to be injected into our landscapes. How it will happen, urban planners will answer that. We have not been able to answer those questions so far, but hopefully we do so soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting, I really like your statement that we are in nature's way. We are really sitting in nature's way. And I think we do forget sometimes we are manipulating our landscapes a lot. And that is creating more risks, and we aren't paying attention to it. And on the trees concept, there's a very interesting, the US Forest Service has something called a tree equity score. in the urban context, what they talk about is they look at the urban profile, the whole city, and you can relate to that immediately when I tell you what that means. It's like there are certain pockets that have got a lot more vegetation, and then there are few pockets that have completely no vegetation. And they have about 6 to 8 criteria that they look at. So it's not just vegetation, it's vegetation, it's socioeconomic profile, it's, so, and they have found, and the 2-3 equity is basically, if you're poor and you're living in an area where there is no vegetation, chances are it's also a much hotter area. So extreme heat will hit you more than it will hit you in places where you're affluent and you have health conditions as well. So just look it up. If anybody in this field, tree equity score, it's really an interesting concept to think about. With that, I'm going to come to Dr. Himanshu Shekhar. Himanshu, you've been very quiet and listening to all of these different perspectives on urban resilience. You are coming from United Nations University, and you are doing research as well, I believe, right? So good. So Dr. Shekhar works on enhancing the understanding of future risk and vulnerability trends and their likely impact on climate change adaptation practices in urban areas, particularly bridging the science and policy gap. His work involves coordination with UN agencies and relevant stakeholders who together aim to generate actionable policy-oriented knowledge for further dissemination. Dr. Shekhar has worked significantly on urban well-being research, urban regional policy planning, disaster management and vulnerability assessment, sustainable development, city development planning, socioeconomic research, and teaching. I think, you've heard a number of different perspectives. So I'm going to give you the open floor for a minute to see how you want to, what are some of the latest thinking in the research field that helps us move to the next level. So over to you.
Thanks a lot, Amit, and it has been an absolute pleasure to listen to everyone. Unfortunately, I don't get this pleasure to listen to people particularly doing amazing work in India. Being based in Germany takes that pleasure a bit away. So it's very fascinating. What I would like to start a bit with is that we have covered different aspects. The work I do, my organization, the United Nations University does, deals a lot with bringing science into policy. At the same time, I guess in this context, it would be very necessary to talk about the coherence between the global policy making, where particularly I work with UNFCCC, UNCCD, and UNDRR, and what are the policy mechanisms, because a lot of what we have shared has the potential to shape and ensure coherence across levels. Just, I thought, towards also the end of this session, maybe a few action plans, if I can be that audacious. One is looking at the national adaptation plan that India is preparing. Second is looking at the NDC that India submits. The Sendai framework midterm review is happening as we speak. And unfortunately, that's one of the domain I particularly spend a lot on, national adaptation plan. I'm part of the United Nations for NAP work group of the UN system. Almost all the countries, barring a few examples, don't have as much presence of urban sector in their NAPs as we would like to see. It simply happens because the global policy making in climate change is a very, very global process, while cities don't have a seat there. It's also by the design of, let's say, Climate Change Secretariat of the United Nations. But now things have moved a bit. Cities are now seen as observer institutions. So I guess this summit definitely can help there, ensuring that the urban component, particularly the DRR component of it, gets reflected in the NDC that India submits. It gets covered adequately in the NAP that India is preparing, as well as India's report for the Sendai framework. So these are the three things to start with. Now, of course, there is a lot of wish list. Just a very small research part that we have been working on, and no surprise there that unfortunately we would be very lucky. We would not be meeting the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. We might have to already think of 2.5 to 3 degrees Celsius for a world that has 11 billion people. Currently, we are 8 billion. A lot of that is going to happen in India. What in local terms that mean? If we have to pick the priority areas, there is a lot that the government does, and it's marvelous to see what the Indian government has been doing. Even at the recent COP, India became a very strong voice for the global goals on adaptation. So that was third part of the wish list. Let's have a strong urban component on global goal of adaptation, because the climate battle would be either won or lost at the urban level, at the local level. So yeah, what I was trying to say is the urban heat and water security. These two are going to be extremely critical. Of course, everything else is. And if I can add a few more wish lists, there is ensuring access. As we were listening from our esteemed panelists, we have amazing technology. When it comes to digitalization, what India does is phenomenal. It's inspirational. We have been working a lot with our colleagues in African context, in the Latin American context, and so on. They look forward to the South-South learning. In the Indian smart cities, we had the pleasure to look at ICCC, Integrated Command and Control Center in Visakhapatnam, and they are doing a fantastic work. It would be a pleasure to see that being replicated across India. At the same time, also ensuring this South-South learning that the cities need. Like city networks, they are very, very instrumental. So the access is a key. We have the best technologies, we have the best minds, but do we have access to it? If I don't have access to a phone that allows me to use 5G or 2G for that matter, it can only be so good. And then last part is the gender. We have to ensure that half the population is there in any forum, everywhere, including in panels as we speak of, with all the respect.
Yeah, no, I completely, yeah.
So gender is a key dimension of work we do, and we need to focus there. There are a few things, maybe I thought of sharing a bit of examples. What we have seen are interesting. Social protection, particularly when we look at MNREGA in India, is the largest social protection program in the world, but it does not have a strong urban component. And as we heard from our speakers, the urban poverty is going up. The inequality in the urban areas is becoming stronger and is likely to overtake the rural inequality. So if we don't have an urban space effect, social protection program like NREGA or something, that would be an issue. There, Indonesia is doing quite an amazing work. They have adaptive social protection programs where you have social protection and adaptation together. We can also look at the Latin American countries. But most importantly, what I feel my privilege for most of us being an Indian is, we have everything we need here itself, starting all the way from Leh. And it was amazing listening to Sonap, to Kanyakumari, and from Dibrugarh to Lakhpat. All sort of disasters as we were listening yesterday, almost all, thankfully not all, are there. We have all the layers of policies. We have all the infrastructure we need, but we also have all the sense of insecurity that could be there. So last thing I would like to highlight on unfortunately, if we look at the indicators of inequality in Indian society, they are going up. Be it Gini index, be it income distribution, be it anything, be it even the South Delhi and North Delhi divide. When I first came to the city, I lived in Yamuna Park, so you're understanding all these spatial dimensions, the sense of identity, the sense of being. There's a lot needs to be done, but I am going from here very, very hopeful, listening and learning throughout the conference, and I hope to see the results of the conference in paths that we cross. Thank you.
Thank you, Himanshu. I think, I have to say the 1.5 goal exceeding is a very sober point. And we already saw, the north, I live in Delhi and I already saw this year 50 degrees was touched, right? We touched almost 50 degrees. And that has never happened. I left in Delhi in 30 years back, and I remember the summers were not, we didn't need AC. It was hot, but you didn't need AC, and now you can't live without it. And that is the whole energy dimension of it as well. We're going to see, the GHG emissions, etc., increasing. So it is unfortunate that we've reached that moment that we are saying that we won't hit 1.5 degrees, because that was where the globe was trying to get to. And if we're going to be for anybody who doesn't understand that, that really means that across the globe, our temperature has already exceeded at 1.1 degrees from pre-industrial levels, and we're already seeing the effect. So if you look at what's happening in flooding across some of the countries where you would have never experienced it, all of these patterns are changing partly because of that 1.1, and now we were aiming for 1.5, and now we're saying, we are way past 1.5, it's 2, 2.5, 3, so my kids, your kids, our grandkids are going to have a really challenging time. So I want to say that. But I'm also excited to see that, even at COP, there's a lot of discussion. There was actually, I was at Sharm el Sheikh, and we were talking a lot about adaptation and urban and all. So, there is a growing constituency for these agendas at the global level, which is hopeful. I know we're running out of time, so maybe I don't think we'll have time for me coming back to you, but I want to offer a minute to see if there are questions in the audience.
No.
Did,
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not done yet. But if there's a question here, but otherwise, yes.
Yeah, there are some questions there.
Yeah, so maybe Chair, over to you to manage the...
So we will try to make up for the gender balance issue by first going to the lady over there.
I know, but after the last
We'll do
comments,
that.
yeah, we will come back.
Thanks for giving the floor. Can I ask?
Yes, please.
Myself, Dr. Pallavi Saxena, and I am assistant professor at Delhi University and working in air pollution and climate change mitigation. My question is to the panel that if we are talking in terms of urban resilience, as there is a problem of urban heat island in many of the metropoles, and if we are talking in terms of planting the trees, then what are the criteria that the government has been taken in, or the scientific communities are being taken for the selection of the trees? Because there are some plant species and trees which emit biogenic VOCs, and they are being responsible further for the formation of tropospheric ozone and the aerosol formation. So what is the planting criteria for the green infrastructures in India? Thank you.
Well, the planting criteria in any city should be that the tree planting in the city should represent the biodiversity of the entire region. But what is happening unfortunately in India's cities is that because of cattle pressure and the sense of urgency to at least for some time protect that we are going to plant, bulk of the planting is happening of species which are non-grazable, which are non-flowering, which are non-fruiting. So if you see, most of the planting in our cities will be Pongamia pinnata, and I can list the species. So there's a heavy skew towards species which are not destroyed by animals in the city. All cities, even in Delhi, you'll see cows and buffaloes roaming on the street. We are not able to control the cattle population in our cities, because of which it's very difficult to say what you plant. So the planting agencies, they will 99% of the times go for something which is non-grazable, which actually reduces the spectrum of planting to a very narrow species base. So that requires the intervention of or efforts of a large number of bodies other than the agency responsible for maintaining the green cover in the city. The second component is that encroachment in green spaces is very easily seen as a poverty alleviation tool. If you go to any organized layout in Delhi, you will find that the footpaths, the green belts along, and these happen only in planned areas. Unplanned areas don't have those things. So in unplanned areas, if there is a tree, it will be cut to park a car. But in a layout like Dwarka or Vasant Kunj, where some space for planting has been allowed, the encroachment is very easily tolerated in these areas because they are not hurting anybody's economic thing. So that is another problem that green agencies face, that first of all you plant something that can survive, and even if that survives, it's taken over by informal settlements. I'm not saying that people who are living in informal settlements are not citizens of the country. They should be, their needs should be addressed. They must be taken care of. But allowing informal settlements in green areas, or at least areas which were meant for setting up green cover, is not a way to remove a country's poverty. I live in Saket. If you see the road going from Press Enclave towards Sheikh Sarai, there is a huge PWD green belt along the road, and it is occupied by flower pot sellers, by old car sellers, people doing the iron smith work on the roads, and that's very easily related. No, poor people, let them stay there. So city has to value its green cover much more than what we value today. The exact species, what should be chosen, what should not be, that question only arises after we are able to ensure that the trees which we plant in unprotected landscapes. One is to have biodiversity park which is locked, which is fenced, which is boundary walled from all sides. So there you can plant anything, but in the rest of the areas, these challenges are there. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll see whether we have time for more questions, but because before that we would like to come to Major General Bansal. General Bansal is an old hand in contributing to disaster risk management in the country, and his last formal role was as the Executive Director of the National Institute of Disaster Management. And I would request General Bansal to also give his remarks.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Bindal.
So, that's okay. I'll just talk on two issues. I'll first try to bring out the quantum of risk that we are talking. In urbanization, one of the studies brought out that every minute there is a dwelling unit being made in India. So in this talk of 1 hour, 10 minutes, close to 70 houses have been made somewhere or other. And out of that, more than 80% are non-engineered, where they have been made without conforming to the bylaws, building bylaws that have been given. So that itself puts an impact on the disaster resilience index of that particular house or that locality. So if this is the scale of urbanization that we are talking about, if this is the intensity of urbanization that we are talking about, as associated also with the density. Today, Delhi, Bombay, the density is close to 20,000. If the average density is 20,000, then you can imagine the max and min that must be there. The max might be up to 35,000 also, because if we see the whole chart. So these all have a lot of issues which have a sectoral impact, whether it be social, health impact, climate related impacts on the economic front. So there is a need to carry out mitigation measures both on structural fronts and non-structural fronts. And to add to this problem is the issue of peri-urban, because one of the topics of this particular session is infrastructure and city resilience, including peri-urban. Today, every city is thriving on the efforts of the peri-urban. All our workforce, half of the food, the vegetables that we eat comes from the peri-urban areas. Now, peri-urban areas do not come under urban local bodies or a more structured urban laws. They come under rural development programs, wherein the rules and regulations for them is much more lax. And hence this particular divide is also creating more and more disaster related issues in the peri-urban areas. We have seen that when Yamuna floodplains are at a higher risk of floods, our vegetable supply stops, or the quality of the vegetable suffers. So there is a need that when we talk about cities, we must take into account the peri-urban areas, and now it is a governance issue. It is not a planner's issue, because both the cities are being governed by a different set of laws. So this governance issue needs to be addressed in a great detail, which I think there is a session also on governance issues later, where how do we bring about cohesion in the development of a urban area and link it with the peri-urban area surrounding that area, or I'll say supporting that urban area. So these are the 2 points I wanted to make as of now. Thank you.
Thank you, Major General Bindal. I think, and again, these are, urban is such a complicated space that 1.5 hours is actually not enough at all to try to touch everything under it. But thank you for highlighting the peri-urban, and, from an environmental planning point of view, it's actually beyond peri-urban as well. So, when you start looking at flood catchment areas and stuff, the scale of what we need to think about sometimes is very different depending on the context as well. But thank you for highlighting the peri-urban aspect as well. I don't think we have time for more questions, but all of us are available, so feel free to catch us. I do want to give the final word to our chair, Professor Sinha. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we are at the end of a very, very engaging session. And I would like to thank all the distinguished delegates here, as well as to the people over here for listening to them and understanding and sharing with them your concerns regarding the key issues with urban resilience. Just a couple of points I want to reiterate. One is that we need better situation assessment. So right now, a lot of the decision making in urban areas is based on incomplete or based on assumed information. So better understanding of the ground situation is the important criteria moving forward. And secondly, while it is very heartening to know that so much new infrastructure of all kinds, including physical infrastructure and ICT infrastructure is being developed, it is very important to ensure that these infrastructure are also resilient and due attention has to be paid to them. So these are the 2 points, 2 of the key points which I picked up from the discussions by the delegates over here. And I would like to thank all of you for being a part of this session, and all of us are available during the lunch break for further discussion. So thank you very much. I hand over to the organizers.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. And I would now quickly request Dr. Sweta Vaidya, consultant NIDM, to kindly do the honors of presenting mementos as a token of gratitude. First, we begin with our distinguished chairperson, Professor Ravi Sinha, professor from IIT Mumbai. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for all those valuable inputs we had from you. To Dr. Amit Prothi, Director General CDRI, our distinguished moderator for this session. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for that wonderful moderation, for making this session very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Vaidya, for doing the honors. I now request Ms. Fatima Amin from NIDM to kindly present a memento to Shri Sanjeev Bansal, DG EarnNet, Government of India. Thank you very much indeed, sir. To Shri Manish Dubey, Chief of Practice, Indian Institute for Human Settlements, Bengaluru. Thank you very much indeed, sir. And to Dr. Aditya V. Bahadur, Principal Researcher, Urban Resilience Lead and Chair, Research Strategy Team, IIED. Thank you, Ms. Fatima, for doing the honors. I now invite Dr. Sanyanbi Hodam, Assistant Professor, Periurban, Ministry of Jal Shakti, to kindly present to Shri Manoj Dabas, Deputy Chief of Party, ICRAF. Thank you, sir. To Dr. Himanshu Shekhar, Associate Academic Officer, UNU EHS, Germany. Thank you very much indeed. And to Major General Bindal, ex-ED NIDM. Thank you very much indeed, sir. And may I request the panel for a quick group photograph, also inviting to join them Dr. Sweta, Ms. Fatima, and Dr. Sanyanbi, and Professor Gupta to kindly join for the group photograph from NIDM. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we will now break for lunch. Please do not forget to visit the exhibition area and the Pari-Samvad area. We also have a selfie point created over there. You can create your selfie and tag yourself with the hashtag Resummit 2047 and share it on the social media. Please join us for lunch once again on the ground floor. And the next session will begin at 2 o'clock. I would request everybody to be back in time for the next session. Thank you very much indeed. Please enjoy your lunch.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Morning, sir.